Kia ora anō. Welcome back to Breakfast. Here is your 6:30 news. A geopolitical analyst here says Iran's retaliatory strikes on a US airbase in Qatar were a proportionate response. Explosions could be heard over the capital Doha in the last hour as Iran retaliated to Sunday's US strikes on key nuclear facilities. The Qatari government has condemned Iran's attack. Jeffrey Miller says Gulf states are typically a, quote, safe haven, and the situation is just one step away from a wider conflict.
Iran does not want to escalate this even further, so it coordinated this response, these strikes on the Udeid airbase in Qatar. It gave advance warning to both to the United States and to Qatari authorities. That ensured that no casualties were felt there, and most of the missiles, if not all of them, seem to have been intercepted.
He says Iran had the right to respond to what he's described as a flagrant breach of international law. Well, back here,
a geopolitical analyst here says the oil industry will be nervously waiting to see if US will launch further attacks on Iran. There were fears oil prices would spike, with Iran's parliament earlier voting to close a key channel controlling 20% of the world's oil. But Jeffrey Miller says oil prices have dropped by around 4% since Iran launched its attack on the airbase.
The oil market seems to be betting that this is it, that this is the retaliation, and that Donald Trump will effectively take this on the chin, that he won't respond further because the missiles have been largely intercepted, because there were no casualties. But I think that's a big bet to be making, and there's plenty of room for this conflict to escalate even further.
The Qatari government has condemned Iran's strikes, calling it a breach of its sovereignty. Also joining the program today, geopolitical analyst Jeffrey Miller. Good morning, Jeffrey. Thank you for joining us. What do you make of it after today's strikes in Qatar on US air bases?
Good morning, Chris. Look, it's a very dangerous moment for the world at the moment, and what we saw on Sunday, those US strikes on Iran, were incredibly unhelpful, to put it mildly, and we did need to be speaking out strongly about that, in my view. New Zealand has not condemned those US strikes on Iran, and it should, because it was a flagrant breach of international law. Iran has now responded. It has exercised its right to self-defense under the UN Charter, under Article 51, and it is a proportionate response. I think your correspondent made that point well, that Iran does not want to escalate this even further, so it coordinated this response, these strikes on the Udeid airbase in Qatar. It gave advance warning to both to the United States and to Qatari authorities. That ensured that no casualties were felt there, and most of the missiles, if not all of them, seem to have been intercepted there. But we're just one step away from a wider, even wider conflict. This is just unprecedented. These are the Gulf states. These are typically safe havens there, and they're home to some of the busiest air corridors in the world. And currently, those Gulf states, the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Bahrain, Kuwait, they've all closed their airspace. And these countries, they're the lifeblood of global aviation. New Zealand has direct flights to both Dubai and to Doha and Qatar, and those airports are effectively closed right now.
I mean, and those are, like you say, some central hubs going out all over the world, from not just from over here in New Zealand, but then sprawling out to the Americas, to Europe. How much of an impact do you think that could have? And is there a risk that stranglehold goes on for a longer amount of time?
Indeed, we keep crossing red lines, and we have been ever since October the 7th, 2023. And what we saw on Sunday was unprecedented, a direct confrontation between the United States and Iran. It hasn't happened in the 45 years of the history of the Islamic Republic of Iran. Now we've seen strikes from Iran on the Gulf states, on Qatar. So the longer this goes on, the more the risk is that we end up with even greater escalation that leads into an all-out conflict, a prolonged war. So Christopher Luxon, the New Zealand Prime Minister, is at NATO this week. He has the chance to speak truth to power and to speak up to Donald Trump, to speak up to his other European colleagues, and I think to take a stronger response, because Western countries generally have been reluctant to criticize the United States, and they've been saying Iran doesn't have a right to a nuclear weapon and so on. Now, look, a military solution is not the answer here. We need a political solution. We need dialogue, diplomacy, de-escalation, and we need to also speak up to the United States and say that this is not the way to do things. This is unhelpful. It was an extra escalation on top of what we've already seen by Israel. And just again, to add to all the coverage here, Chris, Israel is continuing its strikes on Iran, isn't expanding its strikes against targets, not just nuclear facilities. They've attacked a university overnight. They've attacked other sites in Tehran for the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. So this war is only getting worse. We need to speak up and stop a bad situation from getting even worse.
Just on the potential for a key oil channel, oil and gas shipments being stopped through that channel, what's the likelihood that that's going to happen?
Well, look, the oil price has gone down after these retaliatory strikes by Iran. So the oil price has gone down over the last couple of hours, around 5%. So the oil market seems to be betting that this is it, that this is the retaliation, and that Donald Trump will effectively take this on the chin, that he won't respond further, because the missiles have been largely intercepted, because there were no casualties, and that there won't be a further escalation, and that Iran won't blockade the Strait of Hormuz, through which 20% of the world's oil flows. But I think that's a big bet to be making, and there's plenty of room for this conflict to escalate even further. And just one other point, Chris, I just think New Zealand needs to remember the Gulf states are very close friends of New Zealand. New Zealand concluded negotiations on a free trade agreement with the Gulf Cooperation Council last year. That includes Qatar, it includes the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Bahrain, Oman. Christopher Luxon was up in the United Arab Emirates in January. These are our friends. And as Qatar has said, this is a flagrant breach of its sovereignty now by Iran. And largely that's thanks to what the United States did on Sunday when they attacked Iran. It was an unprovoked attack. Diplomacy was underway. There were diplomatic efforts, and I just think it's ridiculous to say now that Iran needs to go back to the negotiating table. They were, and the United States then decided to bomb Iran instead. It's crazy, and it is madness.
Jeffrey Miller, very much appreciate your time this morning. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Chris.
Yeah, the situation's obviously unfolding in the Middle East. We will keep you up to date with what's going on.